Sometimes I get criticized for applying the 21st century morals to classical text and not looking at the authorial intention. And I do believe that there is space for both, but in this particular series I just wanted to do the first thing and look at the texts that I believe have changed meaning as the society changed, and where maybe the authorial intention and message are no longer applicable, or at least we can derive a new meaning from them. And I want to start with Taras Bulba by Nikolai Gogol. It's a text that you probably have never read, nor will you ever, but I do have thoughts, so here we are. As it pertains to Gogol, check out my V video. I talk about him extensively there. Here I want to talk about his story Taras Bulba, a part of Mirgorod series. The relevant points here are that he himself comes from Ukraine, so he knows what he's talking about from first-hand experience, and he did research the Cossack uprisings of 1637 to 38 that served as inspiration for Taras Bulba. Let me recap this story really quickly so that we're all on the same page and we will get to meat of it pretty quickly. Two young men return home from their studies in Kiev. They are met by their father, Taras Bulba, a Cossack and a great warrior, and he decides to take them to Zaporozhskaya Sech in order for them to taste the battle. Both brothers enjoy their time in Sech, full of Cossacks, feasts and debauchery. One of the brothers, Andrei, is said to have a softer side. He is a little bit more in tune with his emotions. We get a little bit of a backstory to him, and in Kiev he did have a crush on a Polish girl, but nothing really happened between them as she moved away. Taras and the boys get restless in Sech, though there is no war going on. And so Taras schemes to overthrow the current head of Sech, the Koshevoy, because he's not willing to break the truce that they have with the Turks and the Poles. The new Koshevoy gives the go-ahead to march on Poland. The Cossacks are ruthless. They destroy everything in their wake until they come to the city of Dubno and are forced to besiege the town. One night, a Tatar woman finds Andrei and tells him that the Polish girl that he met in Kiev that one time is inside the city and she's asking for help as they are starving. Andrei grabs some food from his camp and with the serving girl they sneak back into the city. As he reunites with the Polish girl, Andrei proclaims his love for her and renounces his family and his country. A number of Polish soldiers comes to aid the town, and a number of battles ensues between them and the Cossacks. Taras learns of Andrei's betrayal from Yankel, a Jew that he saved in an earlier scene, and when Andrei rides out with the Poles, the Cossacks steer him towards Taras, who then says his famous line, "I gave you life, now I shall take it," and he shoots him in the head. Taras then gets severely injured and is taken away. Upon his recovery, he learns that his older son, Ostap, is now captured and is kept in Warsaw. There is a significant bounty on Taras, and with the help of Yankel, he manages to sneak into Warsaw, but they cannot get into the prison to see Ostap, and so Taras is forced to watch Ostap get tortured and executed. After that, Taras becomes one of the leaders of the Cossacks and leads them in the fight against Poles. When all of the Cossacks manage to negotiate a truce with Poland, Taras is having none of it. He takes his men and continues his vengeful rampage on the Polish soil. During one of the battles, Taras gets captured. He's nailed to a tree that is now set on fire, but in his last breath he manages to shout an order towards his Cossacks that allows them to escape the Poles. Stylistically and narratively, this is an epos. We have a hero who's going off to fight his enemies because they've wronged him in some way. It's an oversimplification, obviously, but an epos is not too complex either. Here, we almost have a deconstruction of an epos. At center stage, we have a hero who goes off to fight a glorious battle, but Taras acts almost like an anti-hero. He attacks the Poles unprompted, he pillages and plunders, he lets innocents die a terrible death of hunger. He then goes on a vengeful rampage when everybody but him have already stopped the battle. The depictions of the Cossack lifestyle and battles in opposition are glorified. It portrays this unity of men who are united by the same cause, who are willing to die for their motherland, and thus hiding the true essence of it behind beautiful words. And I also think that it speaks to my main theme, this aesthetic, if you will, this lifestyle. It gets presented as glorious to men, when in reality it's all very much destructive. And I do want to talk toxic masculinity. The term itself is a little bit controversial. It spurs different responses and sometimes backlash in different corners of the internet. But since I'm talking about fictional character in an ambiguous time setting, maybe I should be able to get away with it? The way that I understand the term is that it's a set of behaviors in men that are destructive to society, to women, and towards men themselves. And Taras Bulba serves as a good example here. We only wanted to drive out the Koshevoi because he's a woman, and we want a man for a Koshevoi. Our titular character, Taras, is depicted as this boar of a man, very much strong-minded and strong-willed. His entire purpose in life is battle and war. All of the characters are not realistic, really. They are very much heightened versions of them so that we can see the themes. Taras Bulba is an extreme version of his character type. He can only see the black and white. There is no gray areas for him. When his sons come back home, the only type of interaction that Taras knows to have with them is not to have a conversation, but to have a fistfight with Ostap. And in the same breath, he also thinks that they are now adults and they need to taste this sweet flavor of a battle. And father and son, in lieu of present greeting after the long separation, began to deal each other heavy blows on ribs, back and chest, now retreating and looking at each other, now attacking afresh. Taras is also abusive and disrespectful towards his wife. The position of women in this society is generally awful, but the way Taras speaks of them and thinks of them is derogatory. She saw her husband 2 or 3 days in a year, and then for several years heard nothing of him. And when she did see him, when they did live together, what a life was hers! She endured the insult, even blows. She felt caresses bestowed only in pity. She was a misplaced object in that community of unmarried warriors, upon which wandering Zaporozhye cast a colouring of its own. Don't listen to your mother, my lad. She is a woman, and she knows nothing. There's very little in the text on women as a whole. The only one who comes into contact with them seems to be Andriy, and we will get to him in a minute. But the overall sense is that there is no place for women here. The lovers of women alone could find naught, for no woman dared show herself in the suburbs of the Siege. Toxic masculinity is about how men treat women, mostly associated with kind of praise, promiscuity and aggression towards women. But the basic thing is that women are not treated as equals. And here we see it in the text, for example, when Taras abuses his wife, and on the meta level when Gogol doesn't even give his female character names. And so we are presented with this community of men in Zaporozhskaya Sich. They are all rowdy, loud, they are living by their own set of rules where the punishments for breaking them are quite harsh and brutal. If a Cossack stole the smallest trifle, it was considered a disgrace to the whole Cossack community. He was bound to the pillar of shame, and a club was laid beside him, with which each passerby was bound to deal him a blow, until in this matter he was beaten to death. He who did not pay his debts was chained to a cannon until someone of his comrades should decide to ransom him by paying his debts for him. But what made the deepest impression on Andriy was the terrible punishment decreed for murder. A hole was dug in his presence, the murderer was lowered alive into it, and over him was placed a coffin containing the body of the man he had killed, after which the earth was thrown upon both. Long afterwards, the fearful ceremony of his horrible execution haunted his mind, and the man who had been buried alive appeared to him in his terrible coffin. The only thing that they live for is war and battle, perpetuating this trait of violence and risk-taking. But when Taras and his sons arrive in Sich, there is no war going on. And Taras gets restless first, he itches for battle. And Taras schemes to make it happen in order for his sons to experience battle and thus become real men. There are peace treaties with the Poles and the Turks, but he disregards them all and kind of schemes and riles everybody up to go to war, because that's the only state of mind and the state of life that he knows, and the only one that he approves of. In his mind, the only state is war, and so when there is none, he creates one. The depictions of battles are terrifying. The Cossacks are ruthless but also calculated. They show incredible prowess in battle and show no mercy. Our hair would stand on ends nowadays at the terrible traits of that fierce, half-civilized age, which the Zaporozhye overwere exhibited. Children killed, women's breasts cut open, the skin frayed from legs up to the knees, and the victim then set at liberty. But as they siege the town of Dubno, they once again get restless pretty quickly. They are asking for battle, they're asking for this violence. The army retreated, surrounded the town, and for the lack of something to do, busied themselves with devastating the surrounding country, burning the neighboring villages and the ricks of unthreshed grain, and turning their droves of horses loose in the cornfields, as yet untouched by the reaping hook, where the plump ears waved, fruit, as luck would have it, of an unusually good harvest, which should have liberally rewarded all tillers of the soil that season. And violence gets rewarded, as portrayed by Ostap, who avenged the death of one of the leaders of the Kuren, the battle units, and gets chosen to be that leader instead. But why consult? It is impossible to find a better leader than Bulba's son Ostap. He is younger than all the rest of us, it is true, but his judgment is equal to that of the oldest. Another trait of toxic masculinity is stoicism, as not displaying any emotions because it shows weakness. An obvious example from this tale is the execution of Ostap, when he encourages his men not to utter a sound during torture. He glanced at his comrades, raised his hand and said in a loud voice, "God grant that none of heretics who stand here may hear, the unclean dogs, how Christians suffer. Let none of us utter a single word." "Well done, son, well done," said Bulba softly as he bent his grey head. And while it is an exaggerated example, it shows the basic premise that a man needs to be tough at all times. It is then reinforced by Taras praising him for it. Another defining characteristic is pride. Taras displays it when successful in battle, but he's also very proud of his two sons, who become real men just like him. That is also one of the reasons why Andrei's betrayal cuts so deep. Not only did he betray his people, but he wounds Taras personally, as he now failed as a father because he sired such a traitor. But once Taras kills him, he completely forgets about Andrei, and from this point on he only focuses on his oldest son, Ostap, and everything that he does after this fact, it all is because of Ostap. And let's talk Andrei, because he is supposed to be the character foil for Taras, but isn't. He shows a little bit more humanity in the way that he treats his mother, for example, or during him sneaking into the siege town, but he's also not blameless. You could treat it as a cautionary tale early on, because we're given his backstory as they travel to Sich, so we're meant to understand that he's a gentler, more tender man than everybody around him. And then in Sich, he gets caught up in all of these rituals of the Cossacks, and he shows a lot of promise in them, almost the same as Ostap. And as they march and destroy everything in their wake, Andrei is just as consumed by this atmosphere as everybody else around him. Taras is proud of both of his sons, as they are both performing admirably in the battlefield. Andrei gave himself wholly to the enchanting music of blades and bullets. He knew not what it was to consider a calculator to measure his own against the enemy's strength. He gazed on battle with this mad delight and intoxication. He found something festal in the moments when a man's brain burns, when all things wave and flutter before his eyes, when the heads are stricken off, horses fall to the earth with the sound of thunder, and he rides on like a drunken man amid the whistling of bullets and the flashing of swords, dealing blows to all, and heeding not those aimed at himself. The turning point for Andrei is unfortunately not when he sees the devastation of the besieged town, like dozens dead. He continues asking very stupid questions like, why haven't you eaten the rats? When obviously they have. Is there really nothing with which they can prolong life? If a man is driven to extremities, he must feed on what he has heretofore despised. He can sustain himself with creatures which are forbidden by the law. Anything can be eaten under such circumstances. He doesn't see the cause and effect here, how his actions and the actions of his comrades led to this, how he is, at least in part, to blame. In this moment, he believes himself to be on the right side of history. He even asks why they just haven't given the town to the Cossacks if they're suffering so much. It's a dangerous naivete, the black and whiteness of it all, because in that moment, Andrei believes that he and his family and his people are always in the right, and the people whom they are fighting are always in the wrong. The turning point for Andrei is the meeting with the Polish girl. And once again, it's this all or nothing mentality that Andrei applies to this situation. If he loves her, then he needs to give up on everything else that he's had in his life, betray his father and brother, and go against them. The switch of allegiances could have worked if he understood the error of his ways, that the Cossacks are not always in the right, maybe. But instead, overtaken by this girl's beauty and his own lust, he renounces everything, his family, his country, and his duty. It's again the same mentality, just applied to a different deity. Previously, his ardor was fed by his love for his country, for his people, for his family, blinding him to everything else. And now it's the same thing, it's this love for his Polish girl. And this single-mindedness of his beliefs and his actions is also, I feel, a trait of toxic masculinity. The lack of dimension or awareness or critical thinking even is what is going to get him killed, like all of his brothers in arms. And that's the conflict that the story presents, honor and patriotism against everything else. When Taras finds out that Andrei has betrayed them, there is no doubt in his mind as to what he's going to do. His loyalty to the cause is more important to him, so he does not even hesitate in killing his own son. Andrei, in juxtaposition, has exchanged his loyalty for love, but in that moment when he faces his father, he just accepts his punishment. He doesn't try to fight Taras, to reason with him, nothing. He stands there, eyes downcast, waiting for his fate. And maybe it's feeble, but it's also toxic masculinity. Because all of these institutions, like the army, they expect obedience without hesitation. What your superior says goes. And that's how the ultra-patriarchal family works. The patriarch holds ultimate power over his family members. And so here Andrei faces both his leader and his father, and he has no strength to fight back. All his fire, all of his defiance gets sucked out of him the moment he lays his eyes on Taras. And that's part of the problem, really, that no communication happens between these characters except the language of arms. And obviously in the middle of the battle is only a good place to talk in Hollywood movies, but you get what I mean. These men do not know how to talk the problems out, they fight them out instead. And since the book is still part of the school program, we're privy to the correct interpretation of the text. And our 7th graders are taught that this is the ideal version of patriotism and love for your country as displayed by Taras Bulba. And the story deals in black and white, so it's very difficult to find a more nuanced approach to it. And I do believe that it was done intentionally. I feel this book could serve as a good example of a story that with time changes message. The message that was previously very much reasonable and acceptable, it isn't anymore. And so the story transforms and we can derive a new meaning from it. And maybe the blind patriotism is not the thing to take away from it. One thing that I didn't mention, because it's strictly speaking not necessarily toxic masculinity thing, but it also often goes hand in hand, is a strong flavor of anti-Semitism and nationalism in this book. I'm not equipped to talk about who's and whys and what fors, but keep in mind the anti-Semitism is strong in this one. And there's a lot that I didn't cover because I wanted to focus on this one angle, but a story this short, it packs a lot in. Gogol has an incredible way with language. I've covered it already in my V video, but it's the same here. Despite the atrocities that he's describing, you're never bored, you're not truly repulsed, just simply because the language is so magnificent. And the English translation isn't too bad, much better than the V one, so if you're curious, check it out.